All right, good morning and good afternoon to my fellow colleagues, church leaders, invited guests from across the United States and from the civic community. Thank you so much for joining me for this very special series of post-election debriefs, democracy, faith, and the common good, part of our Uncomfortable Conversation series. For those of you that may not be familiar with me, I'm Rebecca Simon Peter, spiritual leadership coach. My passion is reconnecting church leaders with their God-given powers to co-create miracles with the divine. And for more than a decade, I was a pastor of local churches, African-American, primarily Caucasian churches. I've written several books. The latest is Dream Like Jesus, Deepen Your Faith. Oh, here we go, Deepen Your Faith and Bring the Impossible to Life. I'm also the founder of the group coaching program, Creating a Culture of Renewal, in which we energize church leaders across the country to reclaim their calling, to grow their ministries by daring to dream big, bold visions for the common good. The Uncomfortable Conversation series was born out of this vigorous call for racial equity and justice that we've been experiencing in the United States and abroad not beginning this summer, but especially coming to a head with the murder of George Floyd. And so it's designed to really give faith leaders a place to come to have uncomfortable conversations, to dive into some topics that we might not otherwise know how to approach or know with whom to approach, to have deep discussion, heartfelt listening, and to expand our emotional intelligence so that we can generate renewal during these unprecedented times. So the recent election has brought new questions to the forefront, very important questions for us to ask and answer. We've been looking this week at the strength of our democracy, what is the current state of our democratic institutions. We've been looking at the role of faith leaders and faith communities. What is the role of faith when it comes to engaging democracy and sustaining and upholding our democratic institutions? And while President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have won the popular vote and over 279 electoral votes, 70 million Americans disappointed perhaps in those results, having voted for the incumbent President Trump. So I believe that the role of faith leaders is to dream like Jesus and to steward big, bold visions, dreams that can really enhance the common good. So today we're going to be talking about how do we move forward, given that we really don't have common realities in the country, as demonstrated by the split in the vote in the United States, but there are other nuances as well among us. How do we move towards a common good when we don't have shared common realities? Now, I am joined today by two very special guests that are going to help us dive deep and discern some answers here. Special guests and friends, Pastor Terrell McTyer, who serves as the Minister of New Church Strategies for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. That's always in parentheses, in the United States and in Canada. And Terrell is a contributor to a new book called Faithful Innovation, which is about in the COVID era, strategies for moving forward in the church. Terrell is a pastor, a writer, a speaker, a mentor, a coach, a visionary, and a musician who lives by the mantra, it's a sin to be good when God has called you to be great. Let me say that again. It's a sin to be good when God has called you to be great. So Terrell's leadership experience, skills, and giftings include work in music, marketing, entrepreneurship, project management, and more in both the corporate and the non-corporate nonprofit sectors. Terrell, say hi to us.
So hey, good to see everybody. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Thank you so much. We're also joined today by my friend and colleague, Reverend Burry Bessee, who is the pastor of Burlington and Stratton United Methodist churches on the plains of Colorado in the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church. That's a long title, Burry. And Burry has been successfully navigating divides in congregation and community, and most especially in her immediate family. And so we're really glad to have both of you here to speak to us today and to help us think about how we vision for a common good. So I want to kick us off with this idea. An article that I read in the Christian Century recently, actually a little blurb, a quote by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. "Morality matters more," he wrote, "than we commonly acknowledge. It's all we have left to bind us into shared responsibility for the common good. Morality is our oldest and most powerful resource for turning disconnected I's into a collective we. The article goes on to say, since the 1960s, we've outsourced morality to the market and the state, and more recently, we've allowed identity politics to turn society into groups in competition with each other. We need a morality, says Sachs, that turns selfish genes into selfless people, egoists into altruists, and self-interested striving into empathy, sympathy, and compassion for each other. It's quite a thought there. And Terrell, you've developed a process that activates this kind of morality that Rabbi Sachs speaks of. Could you tell us about your model?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think that whole thing is very interesting. One of our ministers and a leader in our nation right now, Bill Barber, is leading this effort of a moral revival. And so this is a great time to be doing that. I got to thinking about how Paul would handle ideas around this, and there are some demonstrations of that in many parts of his writings. Specifically in 1 Corinthians 9, he starts talking about being all things for the good of all people, and doing this by any means necessary. And right in verse 22, he says, "I am weak, so that I might be able to win the weak for the sake of the gospel, and I do all this and doing this by any means necessary." And so when I think about this, it's like really challenging the idea of being weak, because everything in our society, everything since the moment that we're young, is teaching us to be strong. And so one of the things about the pandemic is like all of us were brought to this notion of weakness. Like coronavirus has made us all feel so vulnerable. All the things we've been able to do as Christians and basically humans is now challenged. I can't even hug someone that's not currently in my house, so that's weird for me on those levels of intimacy. So strong and being strength has really been the way in which we've lived our life, but also recognize that being strong, if you're strong, then there must be a polar opposite to that, which is weak. And then if that be the case, strength is a position of privilege. So right now, talking about and thinking about these ideas of privilege is really important. And so Paul is talking about, the privilege and becoming unprivileged per se, in order to better understand the unprivileged. I use this idea of being weak as an acronym to really help us understand how we can be more inclusive. And it starts with, first of all, the idea of the W being the first step is being willing. So you must be willing to change, be willing to be changed by change. That whole notion of just, I'm willing to enter into a process of inclusion and challenge my exclusionary ways. And I have to first be willing to do that. And to be honest, that's where it stops for a lot of people. Some people are just not willing to hear different, see different, do anything different. They're fine just the way they are and want to be left alone in that. And right now we're in the cancel culture. So if you try to push them too fast, you will be canceled. Right. So you have to kind of be aware of that. But then the next step is even in the quote that you just named, where the E stands for empathy. So that's really the very challenging part of this whole idea of experiencing another person's pain or sorrows or experiences is just something people don't really get into as well as they could, which is odd in Christianity, because the whole idea of Jesus Christ is an empathetic move on behalf of God, putting, God's self in our state to potentially understand us more fully, even though God created us. So, but that was, that is a demonstration of empathy. And Jesus just does that over and over and over and over again, demonstrates empathy. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to wear somebody else's shoes. They might not fit. They might not look good with our outfit. They might not, we don't want to do that. But this is the core to all relationships, marriage, education, whatever it may be. In our congregations, empathy is important. If we want to include, we have to get close enough to empathize. So first is being willing, then it's going to empathy, and then the A stands for affirming. And there's two major components when we think about affirmation. When we think about the value of someone into our awareness, and that requires you to notice and then verbalize. So I might, so I it's one thing to notice the beauty of something, but it is the next step to actually say something affirming in what into our articulating your noticing. And this is really important to me because I think that we have in the church done a good job, or really a decent job, I'll say, of this idea of being a welcoming church. All are welcome. Come on in. We welcome you in. And I'm challenging churches that being welcoming anymore is just not good enough.
Yeah.
Like, if I could have a welcome mat in front of my house, that's not good enough. That doesn't mean that you're actually going to come in whenever you want to. I have to give you an invitation. So the
Yes.
next stage past welcoming is actually inviting, and too many churches not getting out doing that invitation. But they might actually do the invite and people come one time and that still not be good enough. Why aren't they staying, as people would say? That's because you're not getting them to participate. So you move from welcoming into inviting, then into participating. And I'm going to say that when we want to be really inclusive, even participating is not good enough. It's not good enough to just give them a chore and say, hey, you be an usher, you be in the choir, you do this. The highest level would be collaborating. What can we do to bring both of our full selves, break ourselves down to come together to build something absolutely brand new, and not have the privilege of saying, oh, that's my pew, that's my seat, that belongs to me, and all those things, like collaboration and collaborating with the co-carpenter Christ to just do something extraordinarily new. So that's the A in that. And then the last letter with the K is know. And that's a matter of just get to know me. Like, if the only thing you know about Black people is what you see in the media, you have a lot to learn about what it is to be a beautiful Black person in this rich culture. And furthermore, what it's like to be Black in American whiteness. So there's so many things that we have to do to get to know each other. We will not really make all the strides of inclusion without getting closer to the issue and understanding what they are by empathy, and then stating it out loud. Like, I'm noticing this about you. Can I say this as a state of affirmation? And then being willing to be changed by all of that.
That I love your model. First off, I love that there is a model. Secondly, I love that it's 4 steps and I can remember it. So willingness, empathy, affirming, and knowing. That those are the steps to coming together to have an experience of commonality. Is that what you're saying, Terrell?
Absolutely. And let me say this again. Most people do not get to the EAK. They don't get to the E. It is that willingness that stops them. They just do not want to change. And I understand homostasis. Like, I get it. We're trying to just constantly rebalance ourselves and stay at a certain position. But anything not changing is dead. We have to lend ourselves into what could be the transformation of. So for instance, like right now in this pandemic, there are things happening with congregations that many of us in leadership have been telling congregations they needed to do for decades. I show up at a church. If your church is not giving, having me give electronically, I can't give at your church. I do not carry cash. I do not know what a checkbook is. It just can't happen. So I've been telling people for years, do electronic, do it. Now we have to do that. So this is the transition, but I want people to think about transformation. What way will we be absolutely new and different as a result of that, and not just be ready to go back to the old way? That willingness is part of the issue.
Yeah, Terrell, that's so well put. I think that the pandemic has done for us what we could not do for ourselves, has it not? All right, now we got to give online. Now we got to have worship online. Now we got to figure out some stuff we just weren't willing to do before.
Yeah, so when churches call me and say, "Hi, I don't know what to do next," and I tell them to close, and they just like, well, no, we can't do that. I'm like, yeah, you can. You're not in your building anymore. You don't know what to do. End. And then they say, well, I can't do that. I said, well, what do you really have to do in order to continue to be church?
Hmm.
And they say this, this, and this. I said, okay, those are essentials. Be that. Focus on those essential, amazing things that you can be, and forget about all the things that you can't do handbells right now. You can't pass the peace, all those things. But these essential things, you'll be able to care for others and do justice work and these things, that is still very viable, even in a virtual reality.
Yeah, boy, Terrell, you're one heck of a coach. We'll close. Oh, you're calling their bluff, aren't you?
I don't get paid for it, so I can say, just stop.
Okay, we know where to send some people now. Go talk to Terrell. He'll tell you
Yeah,
what.
it's a mind game. I'm trying to shock them into
Yeah.
some new realities, and that's what's necessary sometimes.
Clearly. That's so great. Thanks, Terrell. Great to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, willingness, empathy, affirming, and knowing. So, all right. So, Burry, let's get you into this conversation. So, you're the mother-in-law of a now defeated senator. Your politics are different. What sort
Totally.
of dynamics? Yeah, tell us about the dynamics that's created in your families when we're talking about common good.
Okay. Well, my son-in-law has been in the Colorado House. He's been in the Congress in Washington, and he was just defeated in his Senate bid to be reelected. I have to say his gracious speech concession was incredible. I was very pleased with that. I wish somebody else in the country would take that lesson from him. But our politics are totally opposed. And I've questioned him on a few things, and my colleagues think that I should be a voice for liberal activism in his life, and I have tried to do that somewhat, but my daughter has gotten her back up and said, if this happens, you don't get to see the grandkids. And for the good of my grandkids, for the good of my soul, I keep that relationship open. But the good thing was I didn't have to vote for him when he first went in the Senate because I was living out of state. And it's been really interesting. We have had some conversations. I asked him about Betsy DeVos and tried to express to him how bad a selection she was. And his comment to me was, we're going to let the president do what he wants to do, and we'll just monitor that and keep track of that. And I thought, that is okay. If you're going to do that, that's your job. You need to monitor that. You need to rein the president in. And he didn't. Part of the reason I figured he got defeated was because he did not do that job. Another time we had been at their house for Thanksgiving, and I went for a walk afterwards with he and my brother and sister-in-law, and they were talking about all kinds of things going on in the world. And he brought up the entitlements, and they were talking like it was a bad word. And I'm looking at them, and I finally piped up, hold it. You know, I've been paying into Social Security, which you're calling an entitlement, since I was 14. And you're right, I am entitled to this, but that's not a bad word. And so we have had a couple of conversations, but in trying to understand this, I've been reading The Righteous Mind. This is by Jonathan Haidt, and it's the subtitle's Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And Jonathan has come up with a moral foundations theory that says liberals base their morality on care and fairness, and conservatives base their morality on care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity. And then he added liberty after a study. And I thought, you know, this is interesting. And yeah, I care about harm and care for people. I care about fairness and equality. And he says that from the conservative perspective, fairness also equates to proportionality, not an equality balance, but a proportionality. And so I've been
more about that, Burry. What do you mean
this.
by proportionality?
Not a proportional giving or expectations based on your own
resources
and what you put into it.
Okay.
How much effort you do. You know, the conservative thing of welfare is just giving to people who don't want to work, and laziness and stuff. And but here I am as a conservative farmer who's been working all their life and not paying into Social Security, and I don't want to give anybody else those things. And so I've been trying to see that balance. In Burlington, I think we had 85% voting in this last election, and 75% voted for the red states, the red side. And so it's been really interesting to try and figure out how to fix that divide. And you're right, willingness, a lot of people are willing, but they don't want to move past their own place. And they don't look for the empathy piece. We don't have the same racial divide out here as in the city, and yet there is one. It's more social and economic, but it's very interesting to see these whole segments of people being irate and saying, this is what I believe in, and look at that, beating on my candidate and stuff.
So it's interesting. What we have here actually is two models for a common good. We've got the weak model, willingness, empathy, affirming, and knowing each other. That's one way. And then we've got this beautiful breakout from the righteous, is it the righteous mind? Was that it?
Yes, the righteous mind.
The righteous mind. So we've got values that tend to be, let's just say, tend to be favored by folks who identify as liberal, and values that tend to be favored by folks who identify as conservative. And so what if liberals, just a thought, what if liberals were to expand the values and say, and talk about those values and weigh in on those values, instead of what I fear is us versus them. And we're not getting anywhere with us versus them. We're just not. And part of, Jonathan Sacks's quote was great, but this morality, I think my shoulders go up. I cringe a little bit because I think morality, that's partly why we're in trouble. If you were with us yesterday, you watched that video called The Doom Loop of American Politics, put out by Unite America. If you haven't watched it, I recommend it. And it talked about how over the last decades, our politics have gotten polarized based on a cultural divide. Used to be that there were sort of four, conservative and liberal, conservative, liberal, both Democrats and Republicans. But now there's this cultural divide, and we've gotten farther and farther apart. So I think the word morality could be a little bit loaded. But what if we looked at those values, the two models you both have put forward here, and looked at those as ways of finding some common ground for each other. Let's go to the chat window and see what folks are saying there. By the way, all of our participants, I'm so glad that you're here. You're an important part of this conversation. I want you to put your questions and your comments in the chat window so we can weave those in to our conversation. There's a comment about ultimatums, very hard, ruining families and relationships. Now, what happens when ultimatums come from the pulpit? Really bad. If you don't vote this way, then you're not a fill in the blank. We have a quote from Bonhoeffer, allowing God's self to be edged out of the world and onto the cross. God, weak and powerless in the world. That's exactly the only way in which he can be with us and help us. Yeah, building on your model of weakness, Terrell. Good. Other comments, please put those in the chat window if you have questions for our presenters today. They would love to be able to address the questions. What do you see as the future, Terrell? What does the future look like? How can the church help create a common vision for the world, for life? Terrell and Burry, I'd love for both of you to address this.
Are you able to hear me?
I hear you now.
Okay. I'm having some type of internet situation. There's got to be an entire culture change related to the church. We're being really brought down to our lowest denominators here, and it's going to continue to break down. And so I think that level of drastic change is exactly what will be necessary. It's proven in history. There's been many times God has just taken complete civilization down to nothing in order to raise back up things in a way that God would have for it to be. So I wouldn't be surprised if those things were to happen. In order for us to kind of come together towards this idea of common good, we also need to change a part of our culture that looks at others as the subject, or as this whole needy thing, this colonialistic way that that the Christian church has come into understanding itself. And I find two really great constructs to help with that. One is empathy mapping. And if you Google that, you'll see all sorts of canvases and things like that about how to do empathy mapping, how to actually look at the other and see commonalities rather than differences. And I do think that a focus on commonality is really important. The second thing is in community development. There's ABCD, asset-based community development, that says I'm in a community, that the people of this community have strengths. I'm not just focused on their weaknesses, like I want to be able to clothe them or feed them or things like that. Like, no, there are business people here. There are, all these different strengths, and I look at them as assets and not liabilities to the community that I need to fix in order for me to save society. I don't know how we got that theology all bent around like that, but I see plenty of examples in the Bible and in lots of Christian literature to where we were looked at as our assets. And I see God looking at my assets so much more than the things that I have in need, or the things in my frailties per se. So I really think if we make a couple of those shifts, then we will be on a better pathway towards fulfilling the first commission and the first commandment. Okay, so we focus a lot on the Great Commission to go and make disciples, and the Great Commandment to love and and all those things. But what about the first commission and the first commandment? They're the same thing. When God made humankind, God said, be fruitful and multiply. And then when we were brought all the way back down through and then brought back up through the family of Noah, God said it again, be fruitful and multiply. This commandment is still true, that we need to learn how to be fruitful with those things that are the great parts of us, and we need to multiply. And right now we're going in the opposite direction. We're very, very divided. So figuring out how to be fruitful and multiply is a key.
That's so beautiful. So empathy mapping and asset-based community development, looking for strengths, contributions rather than weaknesses. Okay, terrific. And Burry, what are some of your thoughts? We had a question or a comment. How do we even reach agreement on what common is common about our common ground? How do we reach agreement?
That's true. I think Terrell said it with knowing. You need to know the other person. So you need to build relationships. And rather than take those sides, it's building. The first step is let's shake hands and talk about it. Let's have coffee. Let's do this. And if we can't shake hands, let's talk on Zoom. What's going on between us? I mean, okay, what is common about us? You have grandchildren, I have grandchildren. Let's talk about the grandchildren. Let's talk about what's going on in our careers. You know, who's getting close to retirement, who wants to be getting gung-ho about something else. Common things. So you find that common thing. You have, and to do that, you have to have that empathy, and you have to be affirming of that other person. And it is, the first step is willing to be changed and to change. Willing to let your stuff go, to be able to step forward and say, this is what it is. And I mean, my preaching comes down to love God and love your neighbor. And that's I've been hitting on that for 6 weeks. And that's just, how do you get past this divide? Remember that person on the other side is a person too.
Yeah, that's good. A couple of comments in the chat window that can inform our discussion as well. Pervasive savior mentality. Are we done with that? Many seek to be providers rather than doing the longer work of partnering and being in relationship with each other. Terrell, you were sort of talking about that with the colonialist, rather than seeing deficits in the community. What can we fix? Seeing the contributions.
How can we build on that?
Exactly. It is the collaboration. You know, you and your children, Burry, are collaborating towards the raising of your grandchildren, and you decided collaborating about these young people is more important than a focus on our diversity. Right. You know, so for a long time, it's been all about acknowledging diversities, or attempting to diversify. And I think that has served a great and important purpose towards the development of a society, but almost we went almost too far with the pendulum, and now all of a sudden you don't want to see my color, like you're colorblind. Like, no, we're gonna acknowledge my beautiful blackness. You know what I mean? I'm acknowledging your amazing whiteness. You know what I mean? You were beautifully made that way, and I don't want to diminish that. And I don't want you to diminish the way in which I am. But what I do want you to see is that I have something to contribute to your system, and I believe you do to mine. And so we have to figure out what those contributions may be, come together and take off our selfishness in order to, for the greater good, by all means necessary.
Absolutely. So the step there is to find people who may not think the same, who are willing to say, hold it, we're all Americans, let's figure this out.
Yeah, but isn't being American mean I get to hold my difference of opinion? I mean, in the Christian church, we have this little motto that we say, unity without uniformity. And that has been a tricky thing to navigate as a general minister, to figure out how to hold all of these differences for the greater good and still be unified. It's really like, that's why I love your story and what you're doing for your grandkids. I have the same kind of, not necessarily the same thing, but my mother-in-law, you know, Black woman, voted for Trump both times. First time because she could not imagine a woman being president, so she didn't want to vote for Hillary. Right. Second time, again, the idea of vice president woman as president was something, and this is a woman who is feeling that way, but that is the conditioning that she has endured of generations of misogyny and pushing and oppressing women down to where this was what she knows. You know, she's not living into her liberty in that area.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So I recall a time when I was at Scott United Methodist Church, African-American congregation, and stood up to preach and got pushed back. And it turned out it was from the matriarch of the church. I didn't know that she felt that way. She was quite courteous, the matriarch of the church. And we had a conversation later. She prayed. She let the Holy Spirit speak to her. One day she stood up in church and made an announcement. She said, I used to believe that people of a certain persuasion, she meant females, should not be in the pulpit, but the Spirit has been working on me. And was such this beautiful moment. She was so humble. She was willing, right? She had that willingness. Because if anybody could have been a minister, it would have been her. She was raised in a time and denomination. It wasn't the done thing. It just wasn't the done thing. So yeah, overcoming our own ingrained biases about that is really important. There's another comment I'd like to bring in. I mean, thanks for all the comments in the chat window. They're really great. One of our pastors here that's participating, I know his vision is when you and me become we, that there's a sense of we-ness. And a Black Lives sign was on the church lawn for a month when suddenly a group realized it. They realized it and reacted negatively. But that became the catalyst to 4 meetings so far where people listened to the range of perspectives. One group had already used the vital conversation study and were far more ready to hear and help bridge people into a discussion on what the common concerns are and what we can do. The common ground for justice and compassion has begun to emerge for actions in a range of forms. So there's a sign that is good news for some, bad news for other people, but it became the catalyst. That takes empathy and social skill to turn something like that into a place of meeting rather than sort of an us versus them. So that empathy, that platinum rule kind of discussion, which we talk about in creating a culture of renewal, so pleased to see people using those skills to take something that could be seen as divisive and turn it into something that's a bridge, a connecting point.
Absolutely. Rebecca, you know that I love the part of what you just shared where they actually did move to action, because I'm finding this to be the breaking point for me. Like, okay, so I'll speak to a congregation that commits to being anti-racist and they want to hear my story. I always preface it, say, I don't speak on behalf of all Black people. I'm just going to tell you my journey, and they're listening, they're trying, and there's like, you just called me a racist. I want to reject that, and all this. And they're listening, doing all this listening. And I frankly am a little tired of talking. I mean, like, if you can't see all the things that are happening and how they're blatantly, morally, humanly, godly wrong, what is my little story going to do to change that morale in front of you? So I say, so we had this conversation today. You did a lot of listening. When I come back in a year, if I don't actually see the action, the fruit of your anti-racism, then I'm going to I'm not going to see any change. So I'm trying to, there's got to be this movement from proclamation into demonstration. It's not good enough anymore to just have heard it or written it down. I need to know in your actions if you are really about this movement for inclusivity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's why there's so little trust in these areas too. I'm not seeing, if I don't see the fruit of it, I don't know what to trust. I don't trust, with 70 million people having voted for Trump and 74 or 5, whatever million having voted for Biden, I don't know which side. So now, like, if there's an issue, like if it matters to me which side you're on in whatever relationship we have, I just blatantly ask and try to trust whatever answer they gave me is true. Because I'm not going to trust the skull of I'm not going to say just because you're one color or you're one way or you're in one religion, then you automatically voted for one side or the other. Because right now the stats are proving that could not be true.
Yeah. Well, your mother-in-law voted for Trump twice.
Yeah. And we had a meal here at the house and she was embarrassed about it. So she played it off. But then later I found that she still did it again. And it boiled down to that whole woman issue thing. And I would love to see her free. This isn't really even about Trump. I just would love to see her empowered and bold and free and strong in who she is and in right position with the way God sees her. So that's really more troubling than if we had gotten another reign of Trump.
And this is part of the whole piece, is you don't see the women and misogyny thing as clearly as we can see black, white, or Republican, Democrat. It's underlying everything. And I don't know, I think I'm out of that. My parents were divorced and my mom raised us and took care of us. And she felt that we could do anything, or I could do anything. She could do anything she needed to do as a woman. And so I haven't seen that as much. But moving to Gillette, Wyoming, I was the only woman pastor. And I went around the table one day at the morning coffee where all the pastors came around, and I was shaking hands, and one man would not shake my hand. A pastor would not shake my hand. And that just shocked me to no end. But so we have that piece too, that is, I think, is even more hidden than some of this other racial things and inclusivity. We need to find a way of getting through that, not but through it. I don't know. You might have some ideas there, but
all of us have to use our privilege responsibly. Okay, so if I'm privileged because I was born male, then when I see these type of things, then I have to speak up on behalf of it. You know, like I can change another man's behavior as a man and say, hey, what you just did there, that was not cool. And I'm expecting the same thing to happen of my non-Black allies. You know, so the other day I was doing some anti-racism work with a congregation that is in, I can't remember where, they were in a part of Canada. They said, well, it's 99% white here, so we don't have any Black people here. There's no way for us to become anti-racist. I said, you actually are in the best place for this, because there's a higher potential that there's a systemic racism within your whole being in the way that this is developed. So your work is to get other people who are just like you to join you in the fight against racism. It's not to become diverse. That we think we are doing the job when we get a few Black people to come, that mixed couple to join our congregation. That's that's nothing. There's like so much more to this. So I definitely hear what you're saying, Burry.
And it's really a shift in consciousness that we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about anti-racism and transcending or interrupting it. We're talking about a shift in consciousness. As people are commenting in the chat window, first off, I'd like to say many of us were born on third base and think we hit a triple. That's privilege. That's a great comment. You know, biases are hidden within us. I think the thing is that we are all born into systemic racism. We're just born into a system that's inherently biased. We're born into systems that are misogynist. We're just born into it. So when you're saying, Burry, like it's harder to recognize, because we're just born into it. We're immersed in it from the moment we're born. And to begin to awaken, I never did see the movie The Matrix, but I know I need to. When we finally awaken and realize, oh, there's this system going on, and I can choose to do something different. I can choose to think differently about it. I can choose to act differently. That's this moment of, I think, freedom and terror. Like, oh, I could go against the whole system. I need to go against the whole system. That means I need courage. I need allies. I need other people to be with me. I need people to uphold me in this way of thinking about it. And so, you know, Terrell, when you're talking about going up to Canada and they're like, well, we're not racist, or we can't be, or we can't diversify. I get what you're saying. Yeah, no, it's a shift in consciousness. And so it's almost harder to see when it's a monoculture that there's even a shift of consciousness needed, or that could happen. But I think that's exactly what we're talking about. And all of this is towards the common good. I'd like to throw out an idea here. What if we let go of the presidential elections? Like, that's going to work itself out. We voted, stuff's going to happen in the way it happens. I almost think we need to forget about that, because in some way it's red herrings. Because as you've stated, Terrell, look how many people voted for Trump. They're not necessarily racist or whatever. People have their reasons. People voted for Biden for a variety of reasons. What if we let that go and we get back to ground level, you and me, relationship, this weak, willing, empathy, affirming, knowing, these values held by conservatives? What if liberals lean into those values and begin to engage them and and get curious. Get curious about these instead of, hey, you got to see things my way. See, I wonder if with with what Rabbi Sachs said, I'm not sure if he's right, but identity politics becoming a battleground where we're in competition with each other. Is it time for us to move from our identity politics into a new phase, into a new transition? Have we recognized each other's distinctiveness enough that we can now collaborate to moving to common ground, to discovering what that is? What do you folks think? Burry, Terrell?
Go ahead, Burry.
I think we have the opportunity. If we can plant those seeds of care for each other, looking at recognizing that the loyalty and authority and sanctity and liberty that my red friends value are not things that we need to fight about, that we can find a way of affirming that and affirming what they were voting for there, what they were caring for. I've been trying, I can't quite figure it out. And I'm hoping that my community will help me figure that out, how to get past that. But that's the opportunity to have coffee and talk about it. I don't know. I don't know.
I've pretty reconciled that it's okay for us to be different. There's some non-negotiables. There's some values that for me, I have to draw boundaries to say, if you're different in this way, then it details the degree of relationship we're able to have. However, I'm fine with everybody being different. I think that God did that on purpose for some beautiful reason. So I actually, in my work, am dedicated to helping people recognize, fall in love, and figure out how to capitalize on their uniqueness. So in business, that's what it's all about. Which ways can that subtle way in which I can be different, that KPI, that key performance indicator, that, those individual, that unique selling proposition, all those things are very common in business world. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with being different. I think the issue comes in the opposite of love. So we have been commanded to love. And a lot of people think that the opposite of love is hate. That's not actually the opposite of love. The opposite of love is fear. And so it's because of all the things we fear about our differences that we really are not able to have the gains that we possibly could. So we have to really try to break down these and challenge the fear. Some have an acronym for feminists that says it's false evidence appearing real. So if this is false, then what am I really scared of? There are things that you should be scared of. Be scared of lions by all means, but don't be afraid of me. You don't necessarily have to be afraid of me. And so we have to put those perspectives in their proper placement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Heinlein said fear is the mind killer. And what that says to me is that fear keeps us from learning. Fear keeps us from doing all kinds of things. Being present with other people, because that fear takes over. So you're right. If we put fear aside and not give it the strength that rhetoric has tried to give it, can cross those dividing lines and move forward.
Yeah. I think I understand why one will be motivated to preserve their privilege. Like I can understand why you would not want to diminish whiteness. Like, why give up this beautiful thing that you were born into? Why give that up? You know, I don't. So I'm not mad at anybody for saying no. I like whiteness. I enjoy this privilege. I enjoy all of this here. Nobody's going to boldly say that. There are those who do boldly say that, but I can understand from a human perspective why someone would not want to give that up. Why you would not trade skins with me if you had the choice. I can understand that, but but I don't always understand what exactly you're afraid of, as far as just like that personal fear, unless you're just fearing what you might have to give up in order to be as inclusive as you could.
Mhm. There's so much trained into it's like at a cellular level
Yeah.
fear. It's not a conscious fear, it's not a chosen fear. It's
Mm.
being born into a society that just gives you directives. And our work, I think, is waking up. Our work is to wake up and to look around and to recognize, as you say, your beautiful black skin. Recognize the beautiful, I'm married to an Hispanic guy, recognize the beautiful nature of his culture. I got a Jewish mom and a Catholic dad and Cambodian niece and nephew and a Dutch sister-in-law. And my family has embraced diversity, and to recognize the beauty, and to collaborate, not just to set somebody on a pedestal or to set somebody afar, but to do this work of collaboration. And that's kind of where we started. How do we collaborate? How do we create this common ground, this common vision for the future if we don't have common realities?
Mm.
Um, I'm a big believer that we do have a say in how the future goes, every single one of us. We could sit back and say, well, world, you tell me when it's safe to poke my head up again. Tell me when the election's over. Tell me when the United Methodist Church General Conference has decided if it's okay to ordain gay people, or, whatever. You outside authorities, you tell me what my world looks like, what my future looks like. Or I think we can follow in the footsteps of Jesus, who dreamed big, bold dreams, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and be stewards of that dream, be stewards of that authority, be stewards of that creativity. And we get to say, each one of us as leaders, especially as faith leaders, we get to have a say in the future goes. And the more we claim that, and the more we do that work, the healthier our communities will be, because everybody's sitting around waiting for the answer. Who's going to decide? I say you decide, and you decide, and you decide, and you decide. Each one of us as leaders, we're authorized to do that. So this business of finding common ground in whatever realm we're operating in, whether it's anti-racism, whether it's bringing women and men into proper relationship with each other, whether it's dividing transitioning economic divides, political divides, we get to have a say. And that's really what I wanted to do today, was have you folks, talk to us. And you have beautifully. You've given us great models for how we can discover the common ground. We've got lots of comments in the chat window. We won't even have time to comment on them all, but please do check those out. And thank you to everybody for being here today. It's been a really rich conversation. I'm so pleased. Terrell McTyer, Disciples of Christ, that you would be with us in your role. You've got such a big position of, you see the big picture, and you've shared with us quite beautifully about that. Burry Bessee, ministering on the plains of Colorado and divided community, congregation, and family. You've shared with us so vulnerably and honestly about some of the things that are at stake for you and your family and your community. And thank you so much for sharing your contributions with us. To all of our guests who have contributed so richly in the chat window, the questions you've put forward, the ideas that you've shared with us. Thank you for participating. This whole series of conversations, democracy, faith, and the common good. Guess what? It continues after today. Today's our last recorded session for now. These videos are going to be available on my website, RebeccaSimonPeter.com. And we'll be holding more forums in the future. Stay tuned. Check us out on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, probably a couple of other places. I've dropped out of Twitter. I just thought Twitter felt like a cesspool of negativity. I did not want to participate there. Who knows, I may go back. But stay tuned, because we're always doing something to forward discussion in the common good. You can also read us on various blogs, Ministry Matters, Thrive Global, all kinds of places, as I, and all of us together are seeking ways to really dream like Jesus and to have a common future that, darn it, is worth living into. And I just got to have a shout out for Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. We cannot end today without saying hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip,
Right.
hooray, hip, hip, hooray. I mean, this is the America I know and love, and an America of continuing firsts, of breaking glass ceilings, concrete barriers, invisible obstacles, where we are emerging into this common good and this common future. So thank you so much to everybody for participating today. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to give the last word to Terrell and to Burry. What's the last word of encouragement or challenge you would give to us, Terrell?
The last word of challenge: be externally focused. Kind of get over yourself, get out of yourself, and focus on someone else, and redirect this amazing love of an abundant life God has afforded you to benefit another.
Thank you. And Burry?
Be yourself, but get out there and be.
Get out there and be. I think we just heard a common message.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you today, and God bless you on your journeys.
Thanks,
Amen.
Rebecca.
Thank you all so
you.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.